think I've done it, but
Start transcription started. It doesn't say our recording and transcription. Fabulous. Thank you. So at 10 o'clock on the dot, welcome everyone. My name's Heather Collett. I'm the programme lead of the network, and we are delighted to have you here today for our Arts and Creativity partnership approaches to addressing child health and wellbeing through cultural engagement. So many of you are already aware of the importance of creative health, and it was great. We've seen in the over 70 people that have joined us today, you're already implementing it, and others are here to try and find out about implementations because they're about to start those. So if we can just go on to the next slide and the final one, the next one, thank you. If you haven't already, if you can please, thanks Jade, that's fab. If you can please just pop in the chat who you are and where you're from, because we've really got a broad range of people here today. And the most important thing is that we learn from your experiences. This is very much a dialogue. So you're going to see that hands up in the corner icon a few times throughout the slides. And please do, when a question or a thought or a comment comes to you, we encourage you to pop it in the chat. And then after all the presentations, there's going to be some rich discussions and we'll bring you in following those questions. So please do use that function. I look forward to enjoying a really great session today. So I'm going to hand over to Jen Hicken. Jen Hicken is one of the delivery managers here at the network, and she focuses on inequalities, which I think is really key for arts in general and the children in our region having access to those. So Jen, over to you to share some information on the network. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Morning, everyone. If you just want to move the slides on, Jade. So I'm aware that a lot of you joining today probably aren't overly familiar with the Child Health and Wellbeing Network, or where we sit in the system and what your role could be in that system. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of the network so you can get a bit more of an understanding of it. If you want to move on to the next slide, Jade, thanks. So the vision of the Child Health and Wellbeing Network, this is what applies to everybody that is a member of our network, and that could include you guys as well. So our vision is that we believe that all children and young people should have the opportunity to flourish. And flourish is a great word for arts and creativity, because that really sort of speaks to everybody. It's not just about their health, it's about their full well-being and their life opportunities, and that's what we sort of allude to in our vision, and that is key to organisations working together, which is what we try and do. We try and bring people together, bring organisations together, and we share good practice, great stuff that's happening around the region, and no matter what sector, try and drive that work forward and make connections, build relationships, and bring people into the fold. So hopefully that's what we're going to do with you today. Next slide, please, Jade. Thank you. So where do we sit in the system? So if you're out with the NHS and not really au fait with some of the terminology or some of the structures that we work in, it can be quite confusing. So I'm not going to go into too great a detail today. There's plenty of information we could share with you if you want to understand a bit more. But basically we sit within the integrated care system for the North East and North Cumbria. You can see a little map there that we go all the way from the tip of Northumberland over to North Cumbria in the west, and then over to Tees Valley, the tip of North Yorkshire in the east. So it's quite a big patch, and we're the biggest integrated care system in the country. So integrated care system is basically just all organisations working together rather than just being in isolation. We have a lot of difficulties, challenges in this area, particularly around child poverty. Cost of living hits us hard. Middlesbrough in particular often comes up as a really tough area for child poverty. So that's the driver behind a lot of our work. Next slide, please, Jade. And this sort of drives home that poverty issue that we have. You can see how the rates of poverty have gone up in the North East over the years recently, and we're now up to 38% of children living in relative poverty at the moment in our area, which is pretty sobering. Next slide, please, Jade. So why child poverty is so important is because it has a lifelong impact. So the adversities that children have to cope with in their younger years means that their life course can be more difficult for them. So those health inequalities take root in childhood and they follow them through their life as they grow and they develop. And they can have a significant bearing on people's life opportunities and how their body grows and develops. We're highlighting there the impact of living in cold homes that fuel poverty has had a real impact on over the winter. So there's a great report that you can read from the Institute of Health Equity, which highlights some of those issues. It's just one example of the adversities that childhood poverty can cause. Next slide, please. So where did the network come from? So this was way back 2018, 2019. We had some residential meetings that were led by senior leaders and also incorporating professionals from around the region and some fantastic young people to help us identify what priorities we were going to focus on as a network. Next slide, please, Jade. And these are the priorities that those people came up with. So we have this as our priorities wheel, as we call it, the voice of children, young people and families in the centre always. And then we have those key priorities around the outside with enabling work streams and cross-cutting themes. And you can see there arts and creativity has always been one of our cross-cutting themes, which underpins some of our project work. It's really important to look at the holistic well-being of children, and that's really important for us to pick out in this diagram. Next, please. This is just to highlight the number of young people, children and young people in the region. You can see the geography a bit more clearly there as well. But 0 to 17-year-olds make up about roughly 20% of the population in the North East and North Cumbria. We take young people to mean up to the age of 25, and that raises it up to about 25% of the population. So it's a huge group of people that we're looking at here when we're talking about children and young people, and they are the future, to use a bit of a cliche, but we need to start supporting them at the youngest possible age to make their life chances as good as they can be. Next, please. The network membership is open to anyone and everyone who has an interest in child health and wellbeing. It is predominantly health in terms of the percentages, but we have a huge number of members from education, teaching staff, local authority, public health. Voluntary and community sector is huge for us, and that's where a lot of the arts and creativity people that we link up with do sit. So how can we bring these little portions of the pie together a little bit more is what we're trying to do here. But basically we have people from any walk of life that you can imagine. So we've got sports coaches, we've got emergency services people, other encompasses quite a lot basically. And then we have members from all around the region. And we're just highlighting there that we have an apprentice as well that works with us, Adam, based in Middlesbrough Council. He's just one of the young people that we have feeding into our work. We do have a team of young advisors as well that support us through Children North East. So we are really diverse in our makeup, if you like, but we know that we can do better and we're really trying at that. Next slide, please, Jade. This is quite a lot. It's just a flavour of our work. So there's some keywords that you can pick out there that just highlight some of the breadth of the work that we do, and it's very much not just about healthcare, it's about much broader issues as well. Next, please, Jade. This we just wanted to highlight to you because this the Facts of Life report that was created in 2021 really sort of highlights the key issues that we experience in this region. You can drill down by your local area to see what the situation is in each of these sort of these topic areas in each of your areas. But what they can do is help to provide you with some evidence if you were looking to do bids for funding or to get grants for various things. This can give you some good background information for the population in your area. And if there's specific things that you wanted to highlight that you could address through one of your projects, this would be a good place to start. Next, please, Jade. We do have some creativity-based projects that we've previously worked on. We just wanted to highlight this one. Try Life is basically film versions of those old choose your own adventure books that you used to have, or I used to have when I was young, where you could choose your fate based on the choices at the bottom of the page. So these are interactive films where you can do a similar thing, so that you watch a section of the film and then decide what the characters do next. And they sort of film different endings, and that you can see how your decisions make a difference to their lives. So these are aimed at older children, teenagers really, and they're quite hard hitting, some of them. There's ones about knife crime and teenage pregnancy and mental health, quite hard hitting films. But this is the sort of the tack that we've taken for some of some of these really important issues. Creativity and arts-based and culture-based projects are the way to get through to some of the young people in a way that just talking at them just can't. Next, please, Jade. Stuck. There we go. Thank you. Partnership working is really key. This is to show you how we link together education and local authority in some of these projects that we do. Tackling respiratory illness and poverty together was a call to action that we had over the winter around that cold homes issue that I mentioned before. So this was just about trying to really do a sort of quick and dirty solution of getting all the resources together that we could to get out there for health professionals to signpost vulnerable families to support resources, how they could access benefits they might be entitled to, for example, and all about the exacerbation of respiratory illness, so asthma and bronchiolitis and that sort of thing, which really flares up in the winter. So that was just bringing local authority resources together and then sharing them through our Healthier Together website. And then we've got another huddle coming up in a few weeks' time on research in educational settings. So this is how academics and education can come together for some real world research that can have real impact. So this is just an example of the partnership working that we can facilitate. Next, please, Jade. And the CYP transformation programme is a huge programme of work that's mandated through NHS England. So we receive some funding from them to address some key clinical priorities. So asthma, epilepsy and diabetes specifically are part of this. And it's quite a big programme of work. But bearing in mind, there's a healthcare focus to that, but there's much wider determinants of health that feed into those clinical priorities as well. And that's where the community sector comes in, that's where education comes in. So you can see how the collaboration is really important through all of our work streams. Next, please. And this is just a little highlight here of a few things that we've done. So we've been delivering those NHS England pieces of work through the transformation programme. STAR, which I'm sure Martin will be able to tell you more about. We've got advisor roles across the system. So we have health inequalities advisors. Martin's our arts and creativity advisor. So we have a broad range of clinical advisors as well that support the work. We have cross-system membership, so anyone working with children and young people can get involved. That QR code there, if you want to scan that on your phone now, you can join the network if you aren't already, fill in a little form, and then you'll receive all future communications from us. We've got events such as this to share good practice. National and international speakers we attract to our area because we have a sort of unique set of circumstances here, really, from our geography to our population. We do attract a lot of interest nationally. I do produce a newsletter that goes out quarterly and a weekly email bulletin, which you can receive if you sign up for the network. And we have our social media as well, which is really important, at Every Child NENC, if you want to follow us on Twitter. Oh, and there's Child Health Tuesday, just at the bottom. That's our weekly bulletin that goes out. So if there's anything that you want us to share with our wider members, that's the route by which you can do it. So you can get in touch with the network to make sure that your voice is being heard in our comms. Next slide, Jed. I think it might be the last one. Yeah, so this was Al Ainsley Green, who was engaged with us right from the start. He was the first Children's Commissioner for England. So he gave us some great advice as the network was getting up and running those few years ago. And this is just a quote from him from one of his books. Just, if we don't advocate for our children, then who will? That's our primary aim, really. And thank you, everybody, for being here today to help us do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. That was fabulous. It's nice to hear that thread of partnership throughout the work, and it's great to see people like Ben on the session today, who attended some of those original events and supported our work in the early years and continues to. So that's great. Please do, if you tweet, do use our Twitter handle that I've put in the chat, and also that hashtag Creative Health NENC, because we want to make sure we can spread today's message and engagement across as broad a reach as we can. So without further ado, I'm always delighted to introduce Chris. I'm particularly delighted today because he's helped us out and come out of his retirement from his role to support us today. So thanks ever so much. Chris started his professional career as an inner city GP for many years and is also a professor of primary care. He's led and encouraged the development of many services and voluntary sector partnerships and established charitable foundations. He's held many roles and chairing roles, and he's contributed to the Well North Pathfinder that had a focus on arts and health for all, and it's the for all that's really important to us at the network. He's been a great asset at the network, was one of the founding core leaders, and was also, until he recently stepped down for his retirement, was our arts and creativity lead for the network, the voluntary sector executive board member, as well as our operational oversight group chair. So I'll hand over to you, Chris, to chair the proceedings, and just again remind people if they can pop any comments or questions in the chat for later. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather, and thank you for those lovely words. I'm at the stage of life where I used to be things, and if you used to be things, part of succession and handing on to others is an important part of that. And I'm delighted to say, as of today, and now being approved by the Integrated Care Board, Heather will be taking over as the Arts and Creativity Lead on the executive. And for those who don't know, Heather was actually trained as a dancer by Ballet Rambert before sort of abandoning ship and joining the NHS. My role is really just to sort of chair this and to chair the discussion which we will have after the presentations and after a comfort break at around 11 o'clock. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Martin Wilson. Martin will be known to many of you, but for those of you who don't already know Martin, Martin is co-founder, co-director of Tin Arts, and has worked with the network on a project funded by NHS Charities Together on dance in primary schools. And during the course of that, again around succession, we managed to secure some funding to fund Martin as the Arts and Creativity Advisor for the Child Health and Wellbeing Network. So welcome to Martin, and I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning to everybody. For those who already know, hello again. And for those who I haven't met before, a big hello, and I look forward to making a connection and conversation in the not too distant future. A couple of slight housekeeping things from me. I have a very cute small dog called Susie who does two things. One, she sits at my feet throughout meetings. But the second thing is she likes to vocally make herself heard to people who walk past our front window. So hopefully this microphone will block that away when she goes off and scurries to the windows. My presentation this morning is an initial light introduction to my role. There's a lot of information to share, so I've kind of just I'm hopefully going to just kind of scan across it today, and hopefully that will invite you all to engage in more conversation about the role and the possibilities that are contained wherein. We're going to look a little bit about creative health and what we mean by creative health, the broad church that is creative health, and obviously a little insight to the national and the regional picture around that. I am going to talk a little bit about the South East Arts Programme, which was the initial introduction to the network for myself and my organisation, and how the work into the Arts Creative Advisor role has unrolled from that. And then a bit more about the potential benefits and purpose of my role. But I'm not going to talk for too long, because I'm keen to have as much conversation and dialogue today as we can. So, Jade, can you take us into the next slide, please? So just a little bit of insight overview if you haven't met me before. I'm as Chris said, a co-founder of Tin Arts, and that's who we are on a slide. The thing that drives Tin Arts is about equality of access and ensuring those who have least access to the arts can do so for whatever reason they wish to engage in culture, be it health, be it well-being, be it a passion, be it interest, career development. We're there for that, and we have a space in Durham City, and we also work in schools and community settings across the Northeast. And Tin Arts started working with the Child Health Wellbeing Network in 2019 to develop the Southeast Arts Project. We had a little bit of a bumpy ride through 2020 and 2021, and we had to be very flexible and adaptable to the change in circumstances. But that relationship continues, and as part of today's presentation, I will give you a little insight into STAR, the model that is the Southeast Arts Project called STAR, and kind of how that's led to the role today. Next slide, please, Jade. So what might we mean by creative health? And it is a broad church, and many people will have different approaches and different levels of engagement with this, have a long working history or a quite short recent history. But really, we're talking about the intersection between arts and culture with health and social care. The Venn diagram where you have the two circles and where they interlock. And that's against the wide acknowledgement that being creative can lead us all and help us all to be healthier and lives in our communities, and that active engagement for ourselves as well as for others is part of our health and well-being. Next slide, please, Jade. So a little bit more about the oh, that's not quite the slide I was hoping, but it's different to the slide, but I'll work off that slide. There's the slide I was hoping for. I think it's worth recognizing at the front of this, and particularly I can have a lot of empathy with this, the health care system is a complicated thing, and what we're not going to do today is unpick it, because there's a very quick visual diagram of, if you wanted to, we'd have to talk through all these parts and pieces. But if you come away with one key reason for joining the network, it's that myself and colleagues, Heather and all, can hold your hand and navigate you through the system. We can help you to connect into the parts you might want to reach into, to understand elements of it, and you're not quite sure about how that works. So the network can do that with you. So let's recognize that it's complicated and it's ever changing. And I'm sure whatever we describe today might be slightly different tomorrow, but the network is there to help you in terms of understanding and mapping your way through that. Next slide, please, Jade. So to go backwards, we'll roll back to 2014 to start off with. And in 2014, the all-party parliamentary group on arts, health and wellbeing was formed, and they led an inquiry. And that inquiry was nationwide, and there was a series of roundtable discussions, and included service users, arts practitioners, healthcare professionals, commissioners, funders, and it was to understand what is happening in creative health, what are the opportunities, how might we find ways to progress the work, and how might we find out ways to make that open and accessible to all. And then a report was published in 2017. At the bottom there, you can, I mean, it's quite a long report, and it's quite long. I thoroughly recommend you have a read of it and have a look at it. And at the end of this presentation, following the event, we will share links and resources to all these things, so you can find them and kind of look into them yourselves. But there was lots of key findings, and I've picked out 3 there. And one of the key findings that did happen, next slide please, Jade, was a recommendation. Oh, there we go. Recommendation for the creation of the National Centre for Creative Health. And the aim of the National Centre for Creative Health was to address health inequalities, advance good practice research, inform policy, and really importantly, promote collaboration. Lots of people doing great things, great work, a little bit siloed, not very connected. The broader picture wasn't necessarily understood and articulated and visible. So the NHS aimed to create an environment, I guess, where creative approaches became intrinsic to the healthcare system, and it was all about collaboration and bringing people together for the benefit of the well-being of the population. Connected to the National Centre for Creative Health, next slide please, Jade, which is supported by Arts Council England, is more recent developments from Arts Council, which is about the Let's Create strategy and how there's a greater presence of creative health throughout their 2030 Let's Create strategy. And there's a commitment from Arts Council to expand their work and foster collaboration between the creative health and health sectors. And again, points 1, 2, 3, we can look at the kind of key drivers for Arts Council around that work, around the position of creativity, supporting the act of connecting people together, as well as creative innovations of professionals working in this sphere and enhance the global reputation. And one thing kind of on the radar to look out for is they have recently gone through a process of identifying and appointing new creative health associates. And these will be embedded in the 7 across England in the 7 ICBs, and there will be a creative health associate for the North East and Yorkshire. And I'm not, the timeline is they won't be too far away from the appointment, but as well as connecting with myself, there will be another person to connect with who's embedded within the ICB and tasked with looking at how we embed creative approaches into the health and care system. So it's great you're here today. I'm pleased you're hopefully going to connect with myself, but there will also be somebody else to connect with quite soon, working across all ages and communities across the North East and Yorkshire. And Arts Council are also supporting, next slide please Jade, the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And again, nationwide, free to join membership organisation, networking, collaborative advocacy, support and resources. And in the Northeast, it's broken down to 9 regions. There is a Northeast champion for that, and that is Kate Parkin from Equal Arts. And again, in the links we share, this particular alliance in Northeast is going through an open conversation and dialogue to refine and revise how they work and how they serve our area. So we'll share that link. I think there's a conversation towards the end of June, which you can join in with. And again, I advocate getting involved in that conversations and getting your voice heard. And a lot of my work as a creativity advisor is hearing the voice of the cultural sector and making sure there are routes in for the cultural sector to have their voice heard and their work shared. Next slide, please, Jade. Great. So my role, sitting within the network itself, is that the network has a series of advisors, and that ensures that the work of the network is representative of the breadth of the whole system. And this is the first kind of arts and creativity advisor into the network. But as we Heather shared it on, or sorry, Jen shared, it is a cross-cutting theme, and they do want to see it present and more visible across the work. And the first project that I got involved with, as I said, in 2019, was the South Tees Arts Project. And that was initially supported through Charities Together, and more recently my role has been supported by the Culture Big North East Partnership Investment Fund. But I thought first of all it'd be useful to talk a little bit about the South Tees Arts Project as a very quick exemplar of the type of collaboration work we've been developing, and might be an interesting point of reference for future work if you're interested in working with the network. So next slide please, Jade. So the South Tees Art Project, it's based in the South Tees, hence the name. And it was about looking at a place, and it's about looking about how access to arts can improve the lives of those living in most deprived areas in the South East area, and looking with a focus on improving health and well-being. And it was evidence-based, so we looked at what evidence we had around dance and physical activity, being able to support new creative ways of engaging and developing self-awareness around identity, social and emotional learning skills. But also, most importantly, it was very much about, if you take the child on a creative journey, you take the family on that journey with them as well. So working with Children North East, we had a family support priority that fed into this work. So we worked not only with children in school, but we also worked with the family as well. And the next slide shows the range of partners and the approach towards collaboration and partnership itself. So you can see from the range of logos, which will appear imminently. Great. So we have the network and public health right at the heart of the conversation, and it started with the network. Identifying a need back in about 2018, actually. And from then, various organisations became involved in the conversations, Northern Ballet and Leeds, ourselves as Tin Arts, the cultural organisations, working with Children North East to look at the family priority support area work, and then also 2 schools with Grange Sharon and Thorntree Academy, who are based in South Tees, as well as Teesside University, Newcastle University and University of Huddersfield coming on as our research partners, so that as we undertook the programme, we were developing the evidence around how it worked, and also developing the learning to look about how can we further the work and possibly look at replicating and lifting and shifting the work across the region as well for the benefit of more young people. So the next slide gives a little insight into the model that we developed for STAR itself, and this is 2021-22. So for a whole academic year, there were dance artists working in schools, and the pupils started off by seeing Pinocchio by Northern Ballet live in the theatre. So it was for many, it was their first theatre visit as well. And then the dance artists went to schools and delivered dance activities all wrapped around mental health and resilience. And if you are familiar with Pinocchio as a story, it explores friendship, managing change, transition, resilience, and other areas. But it wasn't just about the dance access in school and making it universal for young people. It was also about the whole approach to young people. So we looked at holiday hunger. So there were workshops in between term times to make sure families were supported with things that are very most priority to them, as well as the family support and link workers to wrap around the family unit to make sure the family went on that journey with the child. And it concluded with, like all good dance projects, with the performance to celebrate the achievements and the learning of what happened at Middlesbrough Theatre. And then the research evaluation ran throughout the programme. And the next slide will show up just shows the research and what they found from the work. And this is again, this is available to show afterwards, and it's a quick insight, and you can see how it's all very positive. There's other learning as well within our research and about how we can improve and develop the model. But we had some great quantitative stuff, some numbers that told us how young people engage with the program, their responses, and we had some great qualitative stuff. And all the qualitative stuff was held through focus groups. It was constant conversation with children, young people, the families, and the teachers and the artists to try and unpick what was happening and what we were seeing coming through the program. All of these resources are available on the next slide. Gives a quick guide. If you go to the Tin Arts website, you can find a page that has an overview film, about 10 minutes from interviews and footage from the project itself. There's some 2 little films which focus a little bit more on the work with families, a little bit more on the teacher's perspective. And then there is the overview report, which is the short, light version. And if you really want to do some long, hard reading and or are keen to get into the numbers and the methods of research, the full research project is there available to download as well. So all those resources there for you. The best way to talk about STAR or to present STAR is the next slide is a very short little film, which is the voices of the young people involved in the project themselves and their responses to it and their learnings through the program. So Jade, if you can start that film, that'd be great. Thank you.
In dancing, it's a really fun way to get all your expressions out and help your mental health.
Because they make me nice and calm.
Because it's getting you fit, like when you're dancing and stuff.
And to be able to like make up stories through body language and without speaking.
It makes me feel like I'm in a place of happiness.
It's just very calming and relaxing when we do all of the like exercises.
With writing and things, it's just you're very stressed and tense. But with dancing, you can be creative and you can do what you think is right.
Get to show off my creativity and my skills of dancing.
It's very good because you're like sad. It gets you more happier.
Because before I go and dance, I've got super excited. And it gets all your sadness out of your body and angriness out of your body.
With dance, you get a break from reality and you get to relax and just let yourself be yourself. You're allowed to be yourself.
Great, thank you, Jade. And as I said, if you go and watch the longer film, you can see those, and you can see more young people talking about the program. And I'm sure that if we all did things that got us super excited before we did them, we do a lot more of them as well. So STAR was on my initial personal connection to the network and conversations with all those partners. And then we started to think about, well, how did this become sustained? How do we embed this in the work of the network? So that then led to the development of the advisor role. And the advisor role is just started back end of last year, 2022. So even though I've been here 6 months doing the role, it's 1 day a week doing the role away from Tin Arts. But as I said at the start, the system is a complicated thing. So these things are taking time. So we're really interested in how we can all go on that journey with us. And any learning I have, I can share that. But what I really need is to make sure that the role reflects and is representative of the creative and cultural sector. I have a personal journey into art and culture, and I have a personal way, we are a dance organization, we do certain things in certain places when I am not representative of the whole arts and cultural sector. So today really is a bit that call out about getting involved and contributing towards that conversation. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look a little bit about the purpose and benefits of the role. So really, the bold bit at the top is about that. It's about the mutual benefit of connection and collaboration. By coming together, what we can create, what we can develop, what we can share, it becomes stronger and becomes more embedded and becomes more sustainable and becomes more meaningful and relevant. And actually, for children and young people, this all goes back to children and young people, and particularly the network. This is about ensuring that our children and people in our area, the Northeast, have the most enriching opportunities and are given the best opportunities to progress and develop and flourish. And I want to create the space and the methods by which we can connect and come together. This is not my agenda, but it's about our wider agenda, and ultimately that platform and voice for us all to contribute towards that thinking, and to, if we can, to influence the health and care system to incorporate and to value what we do in arts and culture, and to find those ways of connection and working together. And so what I might actually be doing within the role is still forming, but here are some blocks in words in nice colors to kind of give you a sense of those things. And I'm sure you can see those words and read those words themselves around advising, influencing, elevating. And if we were to summarize these things into kind of succinct points, this is about me being there as a point of information, advice and guidance, as well as me being there as a point of connection into the network. It's a route through which you can elevate and profile the work you're already doing, or the work you are developing, or ideas you have that you would like to see if there is mileage in developing ideas. So it's a conversation to be had and a point of co-production and thinking and developing ideas together. A broker, so I and my colleagues are able to connect you into people and parts of the system that might be interested in developing those conversations with you. So those conversations, I might not be the best person, but we'll be able to connect you to the relevant people or places where that could happen best. And an initiator as well. As we start to spot the gaps, as we start to see where there are opportunities or new ways of working or connecting, initiating new conversations, and those could be by theme, by area, by target audience, by art form. It's an open call. There is no right or wrong answer in this. We're open to receiving and connecting to all sorts of ideas and places, and actually so much more. And I hope that as we start to develop the role more and we start to have more conversations, then maybe these blocks will grow, or maybe these blocks will become more defined about what these parts are. And on the next slide, there have been some initial conversations already. I managed to talk to quite a few of you about different parts and elements. And these are some of the, not challenges, but see some of the questions that are arising. And first one, I think it's a fairly obvious one, is around understanding and awareness. So both culture and NHS or healthcare system, there are systems and there are structures in place and remits and purposes. So it's about bringing more understanding and pulling back the curtains and understanding how these things work and how these things can connect. It's about having a greater insight into funding and commissioning and frameworks and how funding flows through the system in both sectors. And again, how do we make the most of those shared funding streams? Communication is about who you might like to talk to. And if you were to talk to them, how might that conversation take place? What's the language that wraps around that conversation? And how do you gain commonalities to understand each other and to think about shared priorities? So that's the first thing around understanding the awareness. The next set of themes that have come through the conversations on the next slide are around resources. So it's about understanding and being clear about capacity. Much of the cultural sector, organisations who have, there's a freelance part of the sector and there is capacity to engage around conversations. And ideas take time to develop. And connected to that is funding. How do we invest in the development of ideas and not just the delivery of activity? And how do we find the resource to find the time to have these conversations and to follow ideas through? Because not every idea gets to fruition, but we still need time to test ideas, and we need to find funding routes to do that. And about the alignment of resources. There are existing resources in the healthcare system. There are existing resources in the cultural system. Many organisations have existing funding. How do we align these so they talk to each other? Although they might come from different funding sources and or they might have from the outset have different objectives, there will be points of connectivity where funding can align and opportunities can be extended and or deepened by actually that collaborative working. So looking at the resources available to both parts and how these can connect. And then the third thing is around, which is often one of the things that gets called up quite a lot, is the generating evidence, outcomes and outputs. So this is something that we all do. We all try to measure impact and understand if that is our work effective and what effect it is having with the communities we serve. But often culture and health sectors have different purposes, different audiences, and we gather that information differently. So again, there's an alignment thing about that, and understanding each section's drivers around what the purpose of evaluation is. There is the skills and capacity to actually undertake that evaluation. And they're two slightly separate things. One is the skills to understand what makes for good evidence and good data that can build upon program, and quantitative, qualitative research methods, partners who can help that and support that. And then capacity is, well, having the time and having that built into programs, again, partly funded, but also partly through working smarter and more effectively to actually be able to develop that evidence. And actually a lot of that evidence is out there, as Jen was saying before. There is stuff out there, and it's about translation. How do we help you to understand the existing data to make the case for more funding or more investment in the ideas you're developing? So these are lots of the themes that are coming through so far, and I'm hoping today and further conversations will either put more meat on the bones of these themes and how we actually look at what actions we need to put in place to unpick these, be those seminars, webinars, conversations, resources, guides, but also what else needs to be on the list, what else needs to be considered and thought about as we develop the role. Next slide, please, Jade. Which is a bit more about, so what has that got to do with me, and what's that got to do, and how can we work together? So first and foremost, as you will recall from one of the earlier slides, the levels of representation of arts and culture in the network was in the very small other 5% part. And I would, part of my drive is to really see a greater representation in the network and the voices heard. So simply joining the network, simply cascading it to colleagues and other organizations and networks that you will sit within to get their reps means that there'll be a greater cultural voice within the network itself. I want to convene and initiate opportunities to share, learn and connect. So and like, it could be about anything, but invite me to meetings, invite me to conversations, connect me in, or I can invite colleagues along to be part of those conversations from the health and care system, or if you're in the healthcare system, I can invite colleagues from cultural sectors who I think might be really interested in engaging to contribute to those conversations. So keeping an open dialogue and keeping open to contact and meeting to engage. A flow of information, constant dialogue will help us kind of find these things. We'll be developing more communications activity, which is about promoting collaboration and sharing opportunity and cascading. So if you are able to share your information about your programs, about work you've done, about evidence you've gathered, films, documents, whatever it is, we can elevate that and profile it. We can share that and distribute it and cascade it. And we might be able to reach parts of the systems, organizations you're not currently connected to or not currently reaching. And again, that flows both ways. And as well as our ongoing active listening, which is the idea about, I'm there to collaborate and partner with all and everybody who are interested in, and that the remit of the arts creative advisor is iterative. It responds to need. It's not a drill down, set in stone thing. This is about making sure the role responds to what we require as a cultural sector and how this thing. So what does the cultural sector need from this role? And the next slide, which I think might be my last slide. Okay, yeah, that was my last slide, actually. I might have gone through that a little bit quicker than I thought and given you more time for conversation. But I hope that gives a very brief initial oversight into my role. As I said, it's a forming role, but it ultimately needs to be formed by, or given a mandate by the cultural sector to act on its behalf to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And it's a great chance to get the cultural sector voice represented and heard in a range of forums, in a range of conversations. So I really hope we make the most of this opportunity and drive that forward. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Martin. That was very comprehensive. I think we'll have 15 minutes for questions, and then break at 11 for 5 minutes. Questions, comments. I mean, just one comment from me. One of my other roles has been a director of the West End Schools Trust, 8 primary schools in the West End of Newcastle. And I think sort of one of the big issues I have is around sort of a focus on educational outcomes, particularly around science, technology, educational, maths, STEM, and some issues that this tends to neglect the whole raft of stuff around social and emotional learning. And that those issues have really come to the fore as a result of COVID, where in the 8 primary schools of the West End Schools Trust, levels of anxiety and depression and self-harming behaviour in students in years 5 and 6 has become almost commonplace. And unless we think a little bit more around how we use the arts and creativity to address issues around social and emotional learning, we're all going to struggle. Schools at the moment are not particularly happy places. And what the arts can do is open children's eyes to all sorts of other avenues and opportunities. And if there is one thing I think we ought to be doing around education, it's converting STEM into STEAM, with the arts in the centre as part of a, a whole. Creative arts needs to be part of what kids get involved in if we're going to improve their mental health, if we're going to improve their social and emotional well-being. So an opening sally from me, and I'm sure Martin will agree with all of that. So comments and thoughts from others would be very welcome. And is there a question in the some great things happening around Project Tool in Carlisle and across Cumbria. I think one of the things we're aware of in the network is that there are sort of small pockets of great things when people have managed to get bits of funding together to do really innovative things and to look at how we could do some of this a lot better than we're doing it at the moment. And so we're always happy to hear around other projects. Sarah Penn, do you want to sort of tell us a little bit more about Project Thule?
Hi. Yeah, no, I would just I used to be on the board, the community board. They have a community board at Tully House. Well, it's not Tully House anymore, it's Project Tully, and they're doing so much to kind of get out into the community and really think about different ways of engaging different parts of the community that wouldn't necessarily think of going to a museum. And I just wondered whether that was something that we needed to think about as well, that do we need to broaden out what we talk about as arts and culture? Because I think automatically some of the more traditional creative arts might put a lot of people off. People might not think it's for them. Creating is such a basic thing, and it can tie into those subjects like the STEM subjects, that idea of building, of creating, of having that, I suppose, that creative spark. It doesn't have to be what we would think of traditionally as a creative art. I suppose that's what I was saying. And I think Project Tully is doing that really well. And thinking about different ways of getting the community involved.
Okay, thanks for that. Martin, do you want to come back on that in terms of my own perception would be that we're a fairly broad church.
Yeah, sorry, I was also typing response to Kiz's question in there as well. There was two things. One you were talking about, and one that Sarah said about. One of the interesting points why I was really interested in the work advisor role is because from a personal sense, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've always felt that I've built into our projects this creative health world where creativity has a holistic impact on all of us and our lives, and how that and the positive things that come around us. And I think that it's really interesting that most people I know, particularly in the room as well, I'd be fairly confident that would be the same, and that'd be true. That actually it's ingrained in there, and we start from that place of how do we contribute towards people's lives through the cultural engagement we offer. And actually what we're not necessarily doing very well is connecting those conversations together and making a coherent case or arguments around that in how it works, and that the different parts of the region have different ways of working, and different parts of the region have different opportunities, back to the kind of postcode lottery. And I think what I was slightly responding to Kiz's question, which is around how do we kind of work better together. One of the things I've been very interested in recently is the principle of hold the door open. So if you're in a room and you're having a conversation, it's about being aware of who else is working in that same space or field, and you hold the door open for others to come into those conversations and or to elevate and profile the work of others as well. So knowing more about Thule Project, knowing more about the work in the West and Newcastle, means that I'm not, there aren't conversations which are fairly narrow about the work you do in your organization, but actually represent the broader sector and how those things come. So I think that's really interesting. I do think the new forming role, the Creative Health Associate, is going to be another amazingly strong resource to connect into this. But anybody like takes that role, as well as someone in my role, we can only work on the information we have to hand and or the questions that sit in front of us. So we definitely need that kind of broader conversation. And as a final point, yeah, I would switch to STEAM tomorrow if we could. And we have as well, you know, within this framework, this is something we do. We've used arts to deliver maths in schools. We've used arts to explore science in schools. Arts is a fantastic way to enable young people to learn away from the pen and paper writing kind of presenting part of it. It's a way to kinesthetically get involved in learning and to feel it through your body and your senses. So I think arts has so many different broad parts of that. But yeah, STEAM is the future, and maybe you should trademark that, Chris, and get that rolled out.
Thanks very much, Martin. Just to come back to Kiz's question, this issue of we're all in competition, and this the issue about how we approach health commissioners for funding and investment. I mean, it's the $64,000 question, really, isn't it? And I suppose there's a kind of thought that the arts advisor and particularly around children and young people and arts, there might be a sort of a channel for initial discussions so that we can begin to think about how we pull together interested parties. I mean, one of the discussions we've had about dance is around, are there, if you like, independent dance organisations who could pick up the STAR project, say in Cumbria, with support from Tin Arts, but without Tin Arts doing the direct delivery. So there are some issues about how we better collaborate and work together as a sector to deliver initiatives that have a much wider impact than they do at the moment, because historically we've had lots of small initiatives that haven't necessarily been scaled and spread. They've been interesting, they've been fascinating, but at the end of the day, unless we scale and spread some of this, it has less impact. Martin, do you want to come back on that, and perhaps Kiz could come back on that one too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kiz can talk to this really well as well, actually. Yes, two quick kind of feed-in points on that. Absolutely. Star was always created from the outset, is that something that Tin Arts would lead and deliver and develop with the mind that it would become a model that can be delivered by others. And actually, it's a dance project, but it purposely is called the Arts Project because it could be drama, music, visual arts, creative writing. So what we're trying to identify is a model that puts young people in an arts engagement for health and wellbeing outcomes that has family wrapped around it and is at universal access in schools. So it's not a tin thing, it's a kind of culture can deliver thing. So that's part of my work with Heather, is about how we call it lift and shift, how we pick it up and drop it anywhere in the region, and other organizations can take that work on. The two things that kind of talk to that are making sure we articulate and note down the process by which we're developing work, because you get so caught up doing the work, you're so busy driving the work forwards, the research was really important to stop and be able to reflect and capture how we were doing that work, and actually how that can be shared and how that can be disseminated to others to pick up that learning. The other thing which you were talking before about the conversation and which point we connect into, a lot of my conversations with public health and or other commissioners has been around commissioning frameworks, and often culture or arts and culture possibilities come after the commissioning framework. So the commissioning framework is created, and then it's the kind of how can arts and culture deliver that. What we want to get to a point is arts and culture activity and drivers influencing the commissioning framework. So the commissioning framework reflects arts and culture within it at the outset and then moves to a commissioning place. So it's about being much earlier in the conversation. And one of my learnings in 6 months is these conversations take time. They're busy. We're all busy people with busy diaries, and these things take time to develop. So we might not see it happening tomorrow, but we will see it down the chain. But the more conversation and collaboration we have now, the sooner we can get to a place where things like commissioning framework are much more informed by culture and cultural organisations.
Thanks, Martin. I see Alice has come up with a comment as well. Alice has been around in the system almost as long as me in terms of her relationship with Equal Arts. Alice, do you want to come back on some of that? Okay. Or shall I move?
No, that's fine. Sorry, I was just talking and I was on mute.
Okay, sorry.
Let's see if I can turn my camera on. There we go. I do think it's important for us to think about capacity and join up properly, because so much, as you say, both of you, Martin and Chris, have said that there's lots of work going on, but we need to make sure that it is connected so that there is an opportunity to actually scale up properly. And I do think that that's going to be the role of the ICS. I just wanted to commend the network for actually having Martin in place, because this is if we can try and get this in each of the work streams in the ICB, then that is actually going to make a huge difference in terms of pulling the sector together, I think. So I think it's a very positive horizon, but we do need to make sure that everyone who's doing the work on the ground has the opportunity to get involved in this, just in this kind of way. So yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Alice. And there's a long comment from Ben Dickinson around early years and a focus on early years, and early years is clearly important. The Michael Marmot giving every child the best start in life is incredibly important. And if you look at sort of the stats around reception class, children who are behind in reception class tend to get further behind as they go through the school system. So those early years are fairly crucial to development. And I suppose some issues in terms of what's the, if you like, the specialist role of the arts and creativity in the early years, the 0 to 4, 4.5, 5 pre-reception class. Ben, do you want to come in on that?
No, I think it was long enough, wasn't it, Chris? as a comment, I didn't know if there was time for further discussion as we were running out, but just I just think it's really important, and it is a victory that it's mentioned in ACE's Let's Create strategy. That's a victory. It happened at a meeting in the Tees Valley with members of this network in the room telling ACE that it needed to talk about early years as a specialist thing, but it's not something we all invest in. I suppose I was partly saying that as a reflection on the inevitable focus on school age that is kind of fits obviously for arts organizations, I think. And sometimes in the past we felt like there's a pot of financial and organizational gold at the end of the school's rainbow if we focus our efforts on tying in with that. But coming out of the pandemic, those challenges around delayed development in early years are really acute, and it fits across like a huge hot heat map, doesn't it, over the areas of other deprivation and challenges. And there's a huge amount around imagination, creativity, engagement with children and families that arts organizations can do, and a commissioning agenda around family hubs and for the restructured ICBs that seems to fit. So this network could have a real role in influencing the early years agenda in quite a fresh way, I think.
Thanks very much for that, Ben. We're virtually at 11 o'clock. I suggest we have a comfort break for 5 minutes and come back at 11:05. There are lots more comments, questions in the chat, and we can pick up and have further conversation after the comfort break. So 5 minutes for a comfort break. If people could get back for sort of 11:05, that would be great. Thanks very much, everybody.
Alexa, stop.
Okay, is everybody sort of beginning to rejoin, I think? 5:11. Just a sort of a reflection on the conversation so far. Two things sort of stand out for me. One, I think there are some real opportunities at the moment to push this agenda forward. The Arts Council has clearly come together with the NHS and has created posts that are going to sit within regional health authorities, integrated care boards, and I think this is a really good sign of the way forward. I think there are some issues in terms of how we make best use of these opportunities. And look at this joint funding. I think also from the NHS perspective, the NHS is much keener than it perhaps has been in the past to build bridges with the voluntary and community sector and with the arts and creativity around the whole prevention agenda. So I think there are some real opportunities. I think the other points I would make is that looking at children and young people, you can almost divide sort of that into 4 segments, and those segments need kind of different approaches. Early years will need all sorts of approaches, will engage with different partners, and will work in a different way from work in primary schools, and work in primary schools will again be different from work in secondary schools. Primary schools, there are some real opportunities to. Primary schools have if you like, a more pastoral. They're smaller. They have a more pastoral role than secondary schools. They have better relationships with parents, and there are opportunities to look at a whole range of stuff with kids and their parents that you don't have in secondary schools, where part of growing up is about growing away, if you like, from the family. And again, there's another segment which is about school leavers, early career. How do we create apprenticeship opportunities for the creative arts, for people coming out of school? Because again, a lot of the apprenticeship stuff at the moment is focused on digital STEM rather than creative arts. So just a pitch from me, and I think picking up one of the comments from earlier, there was a comment about sort of longevity of funding. Helen Ward had one of the biggest issues for organisations is the lack of longevity of funding and the requirement to always be inventing new and innovative projects. So there are, I think, as well as inventing new and innovative projects, for me, innovation is about scaling up and spreading as much as it is about inventing something new, because scaling and spreading has all sorts of challenges that innovation doesn't necessarily have. Helen, do you want to sort of say anything further and sort of pick up in terms of your particular question about longevity and how we move that forward?
Yeah, just in terms of like funding or commissioning, most of the time it's for discrete projects that you're being commissioned or funded for. And if you, like many organisations who are on the meeting now, will have projects that happen all the time as part of their regular programme. And unless you're core funded, they're the ones that are the most difficult to get funding for, but they're actually the ones that are primarily most successful, particularly for children and young people. If you have a discrete project for 6 months, that would be really amazing for those young people who are involved in it. But the more long-term stuff, which is what we do, we run regular sessions every week, doing different art forms for young people, and they happen all the time. And we are constantly having to fundraise and think outside the box about how we make those things happen. And we know they have an impact because we've been able to track people over a really long period of time. So some of the young people who come to us have been with us since they're 5, and they might be 19, 20 now. and we've had a massive impact on their lives. We are like their second family, and I'm pretty sure that's the same for Tin and Mortal Fools and other organisations here.
Martin, do you want to come back on that? I mean, I think it's a really good point in terms of core funding for existing projects rather than funding for new projects.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for feeding that in, Helen. And this was when I spoke earlier on. One of the things was the challenges or barriers around funding, and it's not only it's funding for longevity, but it's also funding for the capacity to engage in conversations to understand what that work is. And often, you know, the shiny new things can attract the new funding, and they land, and we don't necessarily value, recognize, or sustain the things that have existed and the work that happens commonplace across our region, such as Jack Drum, or you know, the Forge, all sorts of organizations. So some of the conversations I'm having around that, and kind of slightly aligns to commissioning frameworks, is talking with representatives from public health as well. So having conversations with public health to understand what's driving them, and to elevate and profile what we're doing. And I guess one of the things that, again, it's a slight call out back to that, is it's a blatant call out. Get me involved in the conversation. Share with me what it is you've been doing and how you've been doing it. And let's find a way of noting that down and making sense of it. And then I have it to hand to present and to open the door and, you know, and profile it. And currently I'm slightly working off anecdotal experiences and my knowledge of people and the work of Jack Drum and stuff. So actually the conversation I'm having, apart from me holding the door open to invite other people in, if I can have more information to hand about the scale of the work we're doing and the longevity that sits behind it and the impact of that work, that presents the case. And I think we're a little bit light on presenting the case of that work. And I know that Arts Council's work with the Let's Create strategy is also about that. It's about identifying the work that's happened and making the case stronger through both my work and the work of the new creative associate, and having those conversations.
Thanks for that, Martin. I mean, I suppose there's an action point here in terms of, should we be creating a real-time live directory of projects? And how do we best do that? Because that's dependent on people sort of putting forward a brief description of their project. So Martin's got a range of projects across a whole range of creative medium, including museums, that we might then be able to sort of work with and look at how we pull this together.
Absolutely, I echo that, and many people who already know me know I'm a bit like, oh goodness me, I don't mean mapping, but it's a lot of work, and the minute you have the latest version of it, the minute it's out of date. But I think it's a very necessary piece of work. We have to try and capture the scale of what we're doing, and my role is here to do that, and the network is here to support that. There's a little bit of work we could do about how we talk about and describe our work. Maybe we can identify clearer themes and commonalities about that. So it's not necessarily, so it represents the diversity of it, but actually it pulls it back to some core themes and some core outputs, or core ways of talking about that. But I think, yes, as an action, I think that'd be a great action. And, you know, again, do flood my inbox with invitations to convene and converse, as well as here's some stuff you didn't know about. I've already got 3 emails this morning about people going, we've done this stuff. Can we talk about it, and or can I share it with you? Yes is the answer. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. Heather, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to really support and build on what's been already said, and the network's wider role in that as well. Obviously, it's been applauded that the post has been created, and that was a fabulous sort of initial step, very much coming out of, Chris, your influence from inside the network. Martin doesn't work alone. Martin works alongside other colleagues. So, for instance, Jen, who shared the work of the network at the beginning, her focus is in inequalities. There could be some work that you're involved in and that Jen can support and take down a whole different route. So it was just to acknowledge the network's role in that. And I've put a few things in the chat, and it's about getting that swell of enthusiasm and building on it and taking it to the right route and enabling that. And we've got an announcement shortly around a Creative Health Award. And part of that is gathering. So some of that mapping that everyone's talking about now, I think that is a product of that award process for those projects that fit within that. So there's ways that we can support and enable the delivery of some of the requirements. We're not magical. You know, we still work within our own restrictions and our capacity too, but there's a real genuine interest, drive and energy within the network, and Martin's obviously the face of that out to the system, but there's lots of busy people on the wheel going round behind as well. So I just wanted to articulate that. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Heather. There's a comment from Joe Cundall from the Community Foundation. Joe runs the Newcastle Cultural Investment Fund. Conflict of interest here. I sit on the board of that fund. About sharing the impact. I think, Joe, I'm just interested in terms of the learning from that, in terms of that's a Newcastle-based fund that doesn't necessarily exist in other local authority areas, and some issues in terms of Newcastle City Council took the decision to disinvest in culture and hand over the budget to the Community Foundation. I'm just interested in the learning from all of that. Joe.
Yeah, well, that fund was born out of, as you said, when the council publicly said we can't afford to fund culture anymore, and there was a big backlash and outcry. So they went, oh, actually, maybe we can do a little bit. But they sort of wanted to distance themselves slightly from the decision making, so they handed it to us and have continued to do so. 600k a year, which is directly invested in the cultural sector in Newcastle for residents, to help the sector engage residents in arts and cultural activities. But part of the money for that is ring fenced from the public health budget. So there's always been, since, you know, I like to think Let's Create followed our lead with this, but has always been rooted in health and wellbeing outcomes. So yeah, it's just, yeah, and it is a model that's quite well, I don't know of it being replicated by any other councils, certainly in the northeast. So yeah, anyone who wants to talk about that, I'm open to conversations.
I think that speaks to some of the comment that somebody made earlier around sort of should we be looking at commissioning frameworks and developing commissioning frameworks, because that's very much a commissioning framework for Newcastle around supporting Newcastle-based organisations to deliver community arts initiatives and initiatives with schools in I have to say, probably a slightly different way from the way things are done in other local authorities. Martin, any thoughts about that one? Commissioning frameworks.
Sorry, I really need to learn how to listen and to type at the same time. I'm not doing very well at that. Yes, yeah, it's a conversation that's come up. Oh, sorry, it's a theme that's come up in the conversation I've had already. And what was interesting was about, it comes a little bit back to the evidence-based approaches. So commissioning frameworks arguably are based on evidence-based approaches and understanding what the evidence tells us and tells us about what works, and also tells us about what the gaps are and where we need to develop new work. So there's a little bit of a cycle here where when we are invited, or when I've had conversations, it was like, okay, so where's the evidence that's going to tell us that this is a place and space where we should develop some new practice? And Joe brilliantly has offered to share some learning and evaluation with us, so I can see some of that evidence as well. It's getting that evidence case to be able to sit around the table and go, okay, there is work happening. It has been evidenced. It shows its impact. That should inform the commissioning frameworks. There's a little bit of work to understand how the commissioning frameworks happen, and as we've said earlier, the funding flow through the system is slightly ever changing, and the commissioning framework will be ever adapting and moving, but we need to be involved in those conversations. Evidence that's been gathered will help inform those conversations, because it's talking about what we can do and how we can do it. And I was just responding to a slightly different question from Kiz, which is about working at scale as well. So if you're going to enter into commissioning frameworks and or you want to deliver at scale, I'm not saying careful what you wish for, but that's a lot of work to do in a lot of places and spaces. And not only do we want to be manage expectations, but one thing I didn't put in my presentation was around whether we are workforce ready to deliver this work as well, actually. So to engage in commissioning frameworks is amazing if we create opportunities. Have we then got the workforce and or sector readiness to deliver that work as well?
Heather, you've got your hand up.
It was just in relation to that. It's not just the frameworks. I think it's important to highlight the ICB strategy. It's kind of piggybacking on what's the latest thing that is needed. How can we articulate? And it goes back to language. So if we look in the ICB strategy and in the planning framework, what in there needs to be delivered that the arts sector can help and support the health sector to achieve it, and therefore it will be commissioned. So it's not just the framework, it's the context within that. So I was just putting in the chat as well about the importance of that strategy and the planning priorities too.
Okay, thanks for that, Heather. Just in terms of sort of the action point, Martin very kindly sort of roped in four people to sort of reflect and comment, and I think it might be useful. We've reached the stage where reflections from Alice Thwaite, Kiz Crombie, Helen Ward, Mel Burgess in terms of where next. I mean, the hope is that this will be the first of many more meetings, and much more sharing of information across the North East and North Cumbria around what's going on, and looking at developing a more collaborative approach, and also building in some, if you like, NHS funding to the arts and creativity. Alice, you're top of the list. Can we just start with you in terms of just some reflections on the discussion so far and where next?
Yes, of course. It's good to see so many people are involved in this conversation, because I think one of the things that we've had an issue with in the past is the being able to gather people together, and this network is really giving this opportunity. I think the last comments about aligning with the ICB strategy is really key, and it might be a piece of work that I know that Martin's got a lot on, but that Martin and whoever gets the regional associate post does, and there's also going to be a post in Northumberland. So it's gathering those people together to actually go through the strategy and highlighting what can be aligned with the kind of work that's happening, that's coming in. So I think there's some strategic work that needs to be done at that level. And then in terms of the wider sector, we need to make sure that, as has been said, that all the work that's going on is really highlighted. And it's every time that you're doing a project, you think, who in the health and wellbeing world and in the networks can publicise it and need to know about it. And I think sometimes because the work is so all-encompassing and we're such small organisations that we're just getting on and doing it. But I would really say investing in that kind of highlighting the benefits and making sure people know that you're there just then helps with funding. And that's my experience of working with Equal Arts. One other thing, that when we were working around arts and dementia, one huge brilliant thing that happened was when MoMA got involved in actually raising the profile of the work. So they got money not to actually deliver, I mean, they were delivering the programme, but they got money to highlight the benefits. And that's when I think there was a shift internationally around arts and dementia being seen as being kind of quite mainstream. And even though there's not enough of it going on, at least people understand some of the work now, because I think it's really highlighted. So I would suggest that if we can find, maybe through the Community Foundation or one of the other regional foundations, some money just to highlight the work rather than deliver, I would say that would be a really good step forward. And maybe that's through the NHS, but I think that might be a little bit hard to find. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks very much, Alice. Kiz, any comments from you in terms of reflections, in terms of where next?
Thanks, Chris. I mean, that's such a big question, isn't it, really? I think that would be the first thing that I'm responding to. I think my first reflection, I suppose, would just be actually just how positive it is that we're all in this room having this conversation. That I think is definitely something that I'm taking. The fact that there's so many people here from sort of related settings, all with the same ambitions, is exactly where we need to be. And I'm interested in how Martin's role and the forthcoming roles also can lend themselves to kind of helping pull everybody together in a kind of cohesive and coherent way, and look at actually what the pathway is forward. There's been lots of the conversation, I suppose, that has piqued my interest, both from that sort of strategic perspective, but then also thinking about our organisation, what we can contribute and what we can take value from in these kind of conversations and collective spaces. And I guess a couple of reflections that I just made a few notes of as I was listening to people talk was, I mean, the reality I think that we do have to face is that there is that scarcity of funding, particularly in the arts sector. The arts sector has been hugely adversely affected, and particularly post-pandemic, but also just in terms of, you know, the economic changes, our current government and so on. And these are conversations that just in the arts sector itself are kind of ongoing, with a lot of big opinions about what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening and so on. So I think then actually in terms of working in parallel and helping achieve those priority areas for the health sector, we have to just really dig into I suppose the shared priorities here, but also get serious about evidencing the impact, because the arts and culture sector historically, and this is not universal, but historically there's a bit of a trend for, I can't remember quite how Martin referred to it, but I suppose it's this sort of light touch to evidencing. We know that the arts changes lives. We know that participation in the arts changes lives, but we do need to be able to prove it. So actually looking at what the evidence sets that are going to help us get to those key tipping points in collaboration with the health sector is going to be absolutely critical here. And also having a joined up approach so that we're not all evidencing things in very sort of disparate ways, that actually what are the joined up ways that we can be evidencing so that collectively we can make that really strong case for support. So I'm really interested in what could come out of this kind of conversation in response to that. And I think also I'm quite interested in, I suppose, where we think about the health sector at the moment, because of particularly the mental health crisis that we're facing at the moment, and that is not going anywhere anytime soon. Obviously, a lot of the language is around crisis. So it's going to be really interesting to look at how we as an arts and culture sector and working in partnership are meeting that, but whilst also understanding that really the best and most powerful intervention we can make is in that early intervention and prevention space. So looking at how do we sort of navigate those two things in parallel. And I'm really interested in what Martin was referring to earlier on about actually the cultural sector being involved in shaping up briefs with the health sector, so that we're not responding to something that has been designed not in conversation with people who actually work in that creative space. I think that would be a really positive progression in the right direction. I think that's all the comments I've got at this point.
Great, some very, very important actions there. There was an earlier comment from you about the Wellbeing Practice Guide and Toolkit, and that kind of links to this whole issue about demonstrating impact and value for money. And I suppose some of that is one of the subsequent huddles could be around sort of how do we go about developing impact, or how do arts organisations go about developing impact for that meets the needs, if you like, of the NHS and public sector to demonstrate value for money.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's one of the things with the practice guide, I suppose, was in part looking at that as a way of evidencing within a discrete project, but also by developing a practice that is inherently designed to increase the well-being of the children and young people participating in those programmes. by the sharing of that practice that then could be utilised in lots of different settings, actually you then have that kind of wider influence. So it's not necessarily about the repetition of a project, but you actually have that repetition of a practice and a raising of standards, and the integration of mental health and wellbeing outcomes throughout a creative process.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think there are some responsibilities on the arts organisations as well. I'm conscious in terms of the South Tees Arts project. Stage 1 was intensive work over a year with single classes. Stage 2 is about adapting that model to do the whole school, basically, with less intensity, but doing each year group. So there are some issues about do you adapt your project as you move forward, as you scale and spread?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, let's go to Helen Ward, from Managing Director of Jack Drum Arts. Helen, comments, thoughts from you?
Same as everyone else, really. I think it's really good to see so many people on the meeting with lots of enthusiasm, lots of expertise as well, different art forms. I think it's really important in terms of Martin's role, helping us to join up the dots, because there are so many networks that exist, and we've talked about capacity and resource. Capacity to be at all these meetings is really difficult for a lot of us. So I think help with that. And the work about like how we evidence in the arts, I think we've adopted evaluation processes that we had to do as part of a contract to deliver arts on prescription and social prescribing. So I think it's really useful for us to look outside the arts for where we can find those evaluation tools, and sharing amongst the network how we do it, I think is really important as well. So we're not all looking for different things.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Martin, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to do the hand down, open mic, turn camera on all at the same time. Yeah, I've wrote down lots of things there, and I just want to kind of come back on some of those things and echo a lot of that, actually. And I think it's really great, that so many people are involved and on the same page. Certainly STAR was really interesting. We STAR has been now a 3 to 4 year project, and there's so much learning we've done around how we understand the impact and learning and evaluation. And our task now, I think you're right, Chris, as a cultural organisation, is to share that widely, freely and open source, to go, this is what we've done and this is how we did it, and this is how we've used online and offline ways of capturing that impact, and this is how we measure it. So and again, I think either Helen or Kiz was saying, it's been a bit bespoke to the way we've worked, and it's taken bits and pieces from other people and made a new hybrid version of that. But we should share that because it's there and it should be used if people want to draw upon that and be influenced by that. There was definitely what Kiz was talking about. There is definitely a need to work smarter, because I don't think anybody can work harder, because everyone's working really hard and increasingly so at the moment. It seems a bit very busy times, but working smarter. And talking back to Alice's point about if there are roles like myself and other roles around, we need to also connect to understand what we know and how we know it and how we can bring these things together to make a more cohesive offer. The other thing that Heather talks about a lot, which I always really like as a short phrase, it's the gives and the gets. What would you like to get from my role, from the network, from these collaborations, but also what can you give to those things? What can you bring to the table and drop on the table, so there's a kind of barter and exchange of what's happening, so everyone's flowing contribution ideas into it, but also taking away what they need from those conversations as well.
Thanks, Martin. You will have noticed Mel Burgess is on that list, but I think Mel has already left the meeting. She was here earlier on, but has had to leave. So that seems a sort of a good point to bring this segment together and to hand over to hand over basically to the next section. Heather, you want to pick up the next section?
Yes, thank you ever so much, and really enjoyed that. And I've put in the chat, I'm going to have to rewatch it probably more than one time to pick up all the valuable themes and actions and further questions, I'm sure. So thank you very much for that, and thanks for chairing. So Jade, if we can go to the next slide. What we need now is a bit of a drum roll for our Chris Drinkwater Creative Health in Primary School Awards. So at the beginning, I'd highlighted the really important role that Chris has given to the network, and when he was retiring in March, I was keen to find out what was the most important bit to Chris, because obviously the breadth of the child health and wellbeing system, there's so many different specialties part of the system. I said, well, you know, what's the one thing that really is important for you, and if there was a legacy, the area that you'd really like to us to focus in on. And it was Chris that said it was creative health in primary schools. And also he's alluded to earlier the importance of primary schools, the importance of being able to influence children young enough into the arts, and also the added importance of taking the family with them on that journey. So with that in mind, on Chris's last day with the network at the exec board, we announced that we would be creating the Chris Drinkwater Creative Health in Primary School Awards. And indeed today is the launch day. So a bit of a sort of who, how, what, why. So you've all got the right information, because in the registration information, most people that have registered to either join live or watch the recording afterwards are already involved in creative health in some way, and hopefully in primary schools. So the who, primary schools, we've already mentioned an element of it, and this is one of the documents that Martin highlighted in his earlier presentation. But the importance of arts and participatory arts activities with children, the fabulous impact that it can have is listed here. The cognitive, linguistic, social and emotional development and enhanced school readiness. Now, when we talk about threads and we spoke about the ICB's strategy, in the ICB strategy, it highlights that Best Start in Life is one of the goal areas, one of the 4 key goal areas, and I've put the link in the chat. And the way to measure that is around school readiness. So now you've got the gift of saying, okay, ICB, there's the strategy, that's the goal, that's the measure. You want to measure school readiness. Well, it's participatory arts activities with children that are going to help you achieve that. So that's some of the sort of importance of creative health into the schools and why we want to focus this award into that area. Okie doke. So thanks, Jade. On to the next. So the quote was a bit of the why we need to do it, and this is the what. So what is the award? So put simply, the applications are now open. There's going to be a form that thank you, Jade has prepared, that can be hopefully easily completed, because we don't want you to give us more information than necessary, and we don't want to have to assess more information than necessary. But also we spoke earlier about how can we map initiatives. Well, if people are submitting the initiatives, then we will have a register of those, and one of the questions and permissions in that form is for us to then share that. So we hope to be able to create a bit of a compendium of initiatives within the North East and North Cumbria. So shortlisted projects will be included in that electronic creative health publication that we're calling it. A small number of projects will be selected as best in class, and there's been an awful lot of feedback on funding, and I need to manage expectations on level of funding, but some of those best in class winners will receive a financial contribution, and that's to be focused around the spread of the projects. We can't yet define how much that is because we've still got some additional sources that we're trying to make the pot slightly bigger, but that's to spread that initiative. So and we're trying to give a realistic time frame of until July the 25th. We appreciate it's a very busy time for schools, but normally by July the 25th, people will be dashing off for their summer holidays and well-earned rest. So we wanted to make sure they were in, so then we can make our announcements after the summer break. So that's some of the practicalities. So on to the next, how are we assessing them? And we've got the key criteria listed here. So obviously we've spoken about primary schools. So this is focused into primary schools. So if you're not working in primary schools and within the North East and North Cumbria, that's a requirement of this. We're really keen that we include high levels of deprivation as a focus area, and that's come out in the work of Arts for All. So often it's an add-on. It's those families that are fortunate that can engage their children into the arts, whereas we're really keen to focus the criteria around levels of deprivation. So there's a nice, simple to use, we think, map where you can go on if you're unsure of the deprivation levels in your area. Then that will give you the exact one. So that will be taken into consideration. The importance of partnership and that ethos within the network. So what's the school and what's the arts organisation that are coming together in partnership and demonstrating, and again, Chris mentioned these earlier, how are you addressing the social and emotional learning to improve health and educational outcomes? So we want some of that evidence and feedback, and it might be informal feedback in quotes, and also some of that more formal research feedback if you've got that as well, so we can see the impact. And also it's good to know an outline of the funding, not a detailed spreadsheet of the funding, but where did you receive your funding to do this? Because I think that's often important to acknowledge funders as well. And the plans for sustainability and spread, and because there's a connection between the financial award and that onward spread, it's important that you enable the people that will be assessing these the opportunity to understand how it can be sustained and spread. So they are the awards. It is now live. We will be sharing the links and we will be putting that on social media, so please do cascade that on to other colleagues as well. With the hashtag Creative Health NENC, and really a huge thank you to Chris, because it was due to Chris's retirement and his focus and importance on creative health that the network has developed these awards. So thank you very much for that. So unless if there's any practical questions, do pop them in the chat and I will answer them towards the end. But we've come on to our final section now. And thanks, Alice. Look forward to receiving that information. We end these sessions before our chair's reflections in an on the horizon section, and what we try to do is give a heads up, because we get a lot of return customers from our network membership that come along to our huddles, which are about lots of different topics, and so the beginning is always standard. It's usually slightly shorter because it's for network members that are used to that overriding vision around coming together across organisational boundaries to enable young people to thrive. And at the end we always give a heads up on, oh, did you know this is coming? Have you noticed this is happening? So there's some slides here which perhaps more for reference, and you'll get all the slides after today as well. But Jade, if you can take us through those elements. So this first one is our next huddle is on health and care research in educational settings. So those of you that are already working in schools and you've spoken today about proven impact, this might be of interest. This is some work that our education advisor, so a similar role to Martin's but facing the education system, did some work over the last year on how do schools want to engage in research, and that's in partnership with the NIHR, the National Institutes for Health and Care Research, because they wanted to know how schools wanted to engage with them to enable that they could get more engagement and involvement in research within schools. So that's a link on there for that one. That's in about 2 weeks' time. And then the next slide, and I think Amelia might still be on the our colleague Amelia Silsby. She was a scholar and has spent a year working with the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. Now, sustainability is a hot topic, and you know, when we say about piggybacking on themes, so sustainability, and I know there's creative arts awards for sustainability. Well, this is a free resource that is available to anyone within the North East and North Cumbria. This was launched by Amelia on Tuesday. Do come on your camera, Amelia, if you're here, if you want to say a few words. But that resource is there and available for anyone to use in relation to sustainability and healthcare. I can't see you, Amelia, so I am carrying on. And Healthier Together. Anyone that has children and works with children, this is a valuable NHS resource that a colleague, Laura Cassidy, within the team has been implementing. It is a website and a phone app. So the links there take you to the phone app, but there's also a website if you Google NENC, because there's different versions, and you'll come to an assured pathway of what to do with common childhood illnesses and conditions. And it's been created with expert advisors from across the North East and North Cumbria. And so I do encourage you, if you've got children, to download it so you have it, but also schools enjoy the consistency within the guidance on so parents and schools are sharing the same information on okie doke, well, with conjunctivitis, this is how many days you should be away from school, and things like that. And it gives parents assurance on where to go with common childhood illnesses. So I think, thank you. On to the next slide. And we're coming to the very end. So this slide just highlights how we usually engage through the network. And again, if you haven't already, please do cascade that QR code and encourage colleagues to attend. We try not to overwhelm, but there's a weekly email with announcements. And indeed, if you want to share something, it's not all about us, it's about we represent the system. So if you want to share something, it can go into our weekly email that Jen and her colleagues coordinate. We also have groups where we can discuss things. We've highlighted our Twitter handle there, and so please do join us with those. The next slide highlights our newsletter. We've got a new one imminently, but if you want to see the old one, there's a link to it there and the QR code. And indeed, I can't remember, Martin, if you feature in that one. It often has a feature of leaders and advisor roles. And then the next slide is just helpful links. As well as becoming a member in your own right as an individual, you can represent a network. So there might be groups that you're connected to that you want to register on our network of networks. So please do consider that. And that's on there too, as well as youth groups. You can see there, if you want to influence engagement with children, you can register a youth group there as well. And so thank you so much for that delightful discussion. And before I hand back to Chris, I need to thank Chris for giving up his time today. And it seems fitting that you chaired this event with something that's so dear to your heart, and also it announced the awards, your Chris Drinkwater Awards. So thanks very much, Chris. Over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Lovely to see sort of comments on final comments on the chat. Basically, Becky Crawley. Hi, I have a background in creative arts, but now work for a mental health charity. And although I'm not an arts organisation, could I partner with an arts organisation? And then a link below from Paula and Rebecca, and saying we'd be interested in linking up. This is about arts organisations partnering with non-arts organisations. We've done it in terms of the STAR project with Tin Arts linking up with Children North East around providing family support to some of the families involved in the dance project, and that link between non-arts and arts organisations so that we can sort of spread the value of the arts, I think is also an important agenda for where we want to move to. So lovely to see all of that. Great to have you all here today. And I look forward to hearing more and for looking at the outcome of the awards when sometime in September at the beginning of the new school year. So thank you all, and thank you very much to our presenters, to Martin and to Alice and Mel and Chris for their comments. I think it's been a very interesting morning, and I hope you will continue to make connections. So thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing you more.
Thanks everyone.
Heather, do you want me to stay on and do a post? Yeah, okay.
Jay, do you want to stop the recording?